Welcome to AuthentiCity FM. I am your host, Mike Sable. I am joined by my other co-hosts, Corey Spiegel and Phil Corrali, and we are continuing another conversation for our January disruption. And if you have ever wondered how Richard Petty, the blue-footed booby, Baron von Richthofen, and Elizabeth Shue all weave into one coherent framework, stick around. We'll see you on the other side. Okay, so this is a running bit that we have, and so all of those things perfectly capture our next guest. Richard Petty is probably the world's most famous race car driver. His car does not run without a spark plug, and we have with us the human spark plug. If you're wondering about the blue-footed booby, it's a little obscure. It's this adorable little bird that has blue feet. And that reminds me of the book Bird by Bird, which reminds me of Anne Lamott, which reminds me that writing is one of the most essential things that you can have. And there's a coffee cup that talks about writing that we will get into later. If you have ever wondered about Baron von Richthofen, he is also known as the Red Baron. If you've ever seen Charlie Brown Christmas, you've seen that Snoopy plays the Red Baron, and the Red Baron is Snoopy is about dogs. And so our next guest is an incredible dog lover. And then lastly, Elizabeth Shue. If you are a kid, if you are a Gen X male, odds are pretty good that you had an amazing crush on Elizabeth Shue and Adventures in Babysitting. And we have with us a wonderful babysitter of Wendell and Erickson, my guest, my friend, Rebecca Ryan. Welcome to AuthentiCity FM.
Wonderful intro. Best ever intro.
I don't know how we strung all of those things together. So, Rebecca, you are a shining light in our profession. For those fortunate enough to have worked with you, we know you, we respect you, we adore you. Welcome to the podcast. For the benefit of our listeners who don't know you as well as we do, give us your kind of story. How did you come to arrive in this chair?
Yeah. So I walked up the stairs right after dinner.
Perfect.
Next question.
Maybe how did you get into the profession? How did you get into this local government consulting world that you know and love so well?
There's a head story and there's a heart story to this. The heart story is that my adoptive parents adopted me as an infant when they were 47. And so, like, when I was in high school, people thought my grandparents were coming to my games, and they were very service oriented. They were really into the church and into the community. And my mom, I'm raised in Wisconsin, and here we don't have city council people, we have alder people. And my mom ran for alder against an incumbent. And I knocked doors for her when she was running. And she would send my brother and I to kind of co-supervise each other, back when kids could be unsupervised. And we were walking on 7th Avenue, and we had just gone to our pastor's house to give him a pink flyer to vote for my mom. And we were going to the next house, and my uncle drove up in his car, and he's like, "You kids need to get in the car. Your mom had an accident." And what had happened, it was like in the spring, it was an April election. There was a little bit of ice on the sidewalk in March when we were campaigning, and she broke her elbow. Now, she did not win, but I remember sitting by the radio, listening to the returns come in, WBKV, West Bend, Wisconsin, and she lost in a landslide to an incumbent. And I was a little worried that she was going to be flip the table over, upset about this. And I asked at one point, are you mad about this? And she said, nope. She said, it's as important to want to serve, as it is to get elected. And that has always stuck with me. And I've always just felt like people who work in local government are sort of superheroes. So that's the heart part of the story. And the head part of the story is I have a degree in economics. I'm really interested in patterns and trends, but I also know that things take time. And so as a futurist, to be able to think out 5, 10, 15, 20, I just did a 50-year future for a client because some clients, local governments, have the ability to make long bets, to make patient bets that can make the world better for more people. So that's how I come to local government.
Excellent. Well, we are so excited to have you. If you have paid attention to these January episodes, so we have talked about sort of disruption broadly, and that was kind of the intro. Last time we talked about systems, whether they're visible or invisible, and how important they are. And we've kind of invited you because you do have that really unique perspective to see into the future and sort of distinguish between sort of noise and what's a signal. So, how did you get into this world of understanding the future and sort of guiding this work? Give us, and you're not just an economist, right? You're also a futurist by training. So, how does that work?
Yeah.
Help
So,
us.
yeah, I had always been interested in like demographics. I remember getting Ad Age and, demographics magazines when I was just coming out of college. I'm 54 now. I was born in 1972, so I'm like smack in the middle of Generation X. And this patterns were always really interesting to me. And when I first started my business, my whole, you know, reason for being was to help the generations understand each other better. And then when the Great Recession happened in 2009, I had absolutely no business at all. I fell into a depression and I saw this training course at the University of Houston, this Foresight certification. And I was like, what in the hell is this? So I called can I be sweary on the show, by the way? A little
It's
sweary?
expected. Yeah, no,
Okay, great.
yeah, this is, so I'll just say it's Authenticity FM. If swearing is in your, like, makes you authentic, be yourself.
I mean, if you're watching, I have a swear on the poster behind me. So a reason to tune in. But anyway, long story short is I didn't even know foresight was a thing, but I went to the University of Houston and I started my professional foresight journey then. And what I love about it is it's all the macroeconomics that I was trained in an undergraduate, all the demographics, but it layers in some of the things you guys have been talking about. Technology, how is the economy changing? How are workforce expectations changing, etc.
So that feels like you have this ability to see around corners, right? To kind of know what's coming and help to guide through what is perhaps something that we understand, but maybe don't have a full grasp of. I just had a lengthy conversation in my organization about a very long-term capital project that we're thinking through. It relates to water and water delivery, and we have a water treatment plant. It's going to be 100 years old next year. What do we do? It's going to be terrifyingly expensive, and so I sometimes that conversation at the local government level kind of ends at that point because you're like, okay, well, this is too hard, so let's just do the minimal things and get us through the next 5 years, and then we'll figure it out in 5 years. But that's obviously not the best way to do things. How do you help people like me think about where those, how you look around the corner and come up with that next path?
Yeah. First of all, you know that you're not alone. These kinds of trade-offs are made all the time, and trade-offs are part of leadership. I mean, it's just you have to make decisions. And I don't want to say that, patching something together for the next 5 years is the wrong decision because that's one decision and we've got to take that in context. I'm not trying to absolve you of not doing the hard thing, by the way.
Thank you.
Well,
I was hoping you were, but that's okay. That's fine. That's fine.
but
I could take it that way either way, so I'm
that's
good.
right. That's right. You have both avenues are open to you, sir.
Right. Right.
But I think some general rules of thumb that would be helpful would be before you're going to make a really big investment of any kind to ask which generations benefit from this investment. And if it's only the generation sitting at the table, maybe it's a little too short-sighted. There are like the country of Wales, tiny country, maybe the size of Illinois. I don't know. But they have a commissioner, a next generation commissioner. It's a cabinet level. And their only job is to make sure that any big investment benefits future generations, not just current generations. So that would be, sort of a little check you could build into that. Another way of thinking about it is, because sometimes you've got to make investments that just make local governments run more smoothly. Like your last guest was talking about AI. And in that case, there's a situation where you have to ask yourself, am I making an investment that would make my grandfather more comfortable working here? Or is this an investment that is going to make our grandchildren more comfortable working for
Right.
local government? So I just think there are a couple things you can do to kind of reframe a decision.
So I'm going to pull at that thread a little bit. Government is distinct in its structure, right? We have election cycles, we have public budgeting processes, we're risk averse by nature, which is a good thing most of the time. And so in your experience, and let's reflect back, but also project forward, are governments innately able to even think with foresight the way you described it? Because I think we can all think of, oh, in the private sector, that makes all the sense in the world, super easy. But in the local government space, where you're like, so many communities right now are doing strategic planning, newly elected councils. I think our LinkedIn feeds are all full of people in transition now because of those decisions. How can governments work with foresight when some of these big decisions are really hard and, good or bad, right or wrong, councils are often only worried about the next election?
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, some of the dynamics, like you said, some of the things that are features can also be bugs sometimes. And so one of the dynamics that you naturally have is you're going to have a brand new council every decade, probably at least, right? A brand new council. And then you've got one of the unique features of the moment we're living in right now is incredible churn among leaders, among people throughout the organization, the difficulty in hanging on to talent. And so, it's like things are leaking out of the container as you're trying to figure out, like, how can this container even move forward? So there's a very natural challenge there. But I do think that generally local governments don't have great hygiene around thinking futuristically. And what I mean is this: the major planning instrument in local governments is a budget. And most budgets are copied and pasted from prior budgets. And we just say, how can we do it a little bit better, faster, cheaper? And then you've got the odd, like Phil was just talking about, like the one-off multi-trillion-dollar thing that needs to be done. So we haven't built good long-range thinking just into the process. But then, in the state of Minnesota, for example, in some other states, comprehensive planning is required by the state government every 10 years. Wow, there's an opportunity to really think long-term. However, often our comprehensive plans only think about the hardscape. They don't think about the softscape. So maybe we end up with better bridges and better, greenways and a better physical experience. And I would argue we don't even do that very well, but a better physical experience in our communities. But we don't think about our social structure and, how in 10 years are our residents going to feel more engaged, not less engaged? How are we going to make sure that people have more of a say in what gets in the budget, not less of a say than? So we just aren't asking the right kinds of questions at the right times.
One of the things that comes to mind as you say that is, I wonder how all of our planfulness and all of our thoughtfulness, which is, to your point, in digestible bites, has kept us from being able to be comfortable thinking about big things, right? When I think about the turn of the 19th into the 20th century and what progress we made from a physical infrastructure, just strictly thinking about physical infrastructure, the progress that we made in the first 60 years of the 20th century, things like airports, things like interstate highway systems that didn't exist prior. And if you waited in the way that sometimes we do today to try to make it work exactly within these very neat and tidy frameworks, you'd never get it done. You'd never build the interstates that crisscross the United States because it would be too difficult. And I wonder, we haven't always been so afraid to take to make those big dreams a reality. But yet, when we talk, and when we talk about water, one of the things we're talking about in my region is, how do we do this in the future? And anytime somebody brings up a big new concept, everyone else shoots it down and says, there is no point in even trying that. Just do the small thing that we're all comfortable with, because it's it's the less resistance, the path of least resistance. And isn't that just disheartening when we think about what the future could bring?
This is why you guys are like perfect for this moment with what you're trying to do with this podcast, how you're trying to lead your communities. Because here's how I think about it. So I think when I start to get like a little Twitter-pated about things, I like to zoom out, right? And just take in a bigger horizon. And we're in a moment right now where so much is changing so quickly. I mean, the marginal return on our current systems is getting less and less. It's inevitable that we are going to have breakdown. And that, sorry, Mike, I don't want to get your heart rate up, but that's going to create the opportunity for breakthrough, right? So I think, and we're, Gen Xers, millennials, we are born for this moment. Gen Xers with their sense of irony, and irony is just pragmatism with like in drag. So like this very pragmatic approach, this is what is exactly what is needed. And so you guys mentioned black ice a couple of episodes ago, and that's a metaphor that I've used as well. And I think it really fits this situation, Phil, because when so much is changing and we have an older generation that is really struggling to let go, right? When everything's changing, it's almost like slipping. Slipping on black ice, like, whoa. And what is the natural thing that you do when you're slipping? You try to hang on to something to steady yourself. And so what people are trying to hang on to right now is the safe thing. It's the thing that they can get their hand on and really understand. And so I don't slight anybody for trying to take that safe path, but we are at a point where just protecting what was is simply not going to work anymore. And it's like, we can do this the hard way, or we can do this a slightly easier way. I would like to do it a slightly easier way using Foresight and some of the AI that your prior guests talked about. And I think the other side of that, maybe we'll get into this later. I'm sorry if I'm getting ahead of myself, but like, if we can use machine learning, predictive analytics, all that kind of stuff, to help us spot where our local governments can give more delight to our residents, can ease things, can reduce friction, so that we can just be relevant in the 21st century. If we can do that through the power of technology, et cetera, then what we really need to start doing more of is that human touch stuff, that stuff that AI can't get at, the community engagement, the listening, the coalition building, the stuff that bureaucracy just, presses the life out of, because we're trying to keep this historic system up and going. Hang on, let me just step down from my soapbox. Jink, jink, I'm off. Okay, back to you guys.
But I'm going to invite you right back on. So
okay. Let me get a drink of water.
That made me think of, when we think about archaic systems, in so many ways, I think the government funding model, especially local governments, right? You're either a property tax state or a sales tax state, generally. There are a couple of anomalies. But I think that is also breaking. And so the comfort of the copy and paste budget, everyone on this screen is guilty, and so are most of our listeners, because that's just the way it's always been. And I think we're going to see it over this next maybe 5-year horizon, but there are going to be communities who just say holding on to what was simply is not going to work anymore. We have these systems, civil service, that are a century old and just don't respond to modern talent in any way. And so when you zoom out from your economics lens, the taxation and revenue structure for government has to evolve, I would think.
I agree. I mean, I'm a service provider, and the fact that I only pay taxes on services in like a handful of states, and it's not very much, is ridiculous. Like, we have been a service economy for at least the last 30 years. I mean, it's just been a hockey puck, but we still don't tax those kinds of services in most states. So, I mean, and that's one of probably a half dozen head-slappingly obvious good ideas. I think another one is, I mean, this is an older one, but you guys I think you've talked about it before as well, is priority-based budgeting, right? Where you just take everything out of that closet that you have to like jimmy shut with your arm and the latch doesn't always work. You just take everything out of that closet, say, what is everything that we're doing? Where do we have redundancy? That right there. If you have cops doing an after-school program and Parks and Rec doing an after-school program, like, what are we doing? And then I think, Phil, you mentioned this on a prior episode. You don't want to compete with the private sector. Like, there are things that the private sector can do better. No, actually, Mike, you were talking about this. You don't want to compete with the private sector. So where can we support our local business community and have the private sector do this better? And that leaves us with a smaller number of things to figure out which of these things now really matter. Which of these items match our why for being, our big rallying cry, the halo effect that makes public service a noble calling, and only put those things back in the closet, of the budget, with some care and attention. And it's just, I think we get so overwhelmed by the task, but for anybody who has KonMari'd their closet, you know how good it feels when you are done.
I was not expecting that kind of statement, but I will tell you, I learned how to fold T-shirts using the KonMari method, and
My God.
It changed my life.
Yes. I did not know
Let's
that
exchange
we had
photos
that in
of our
common.
closets and drawers after this, okay?
Maybe. It's a little, there's a lot that goes into that. I'm just going to say maybe.
Okay.
A couple of things that you said. Number one, I appreciate the part about sort of budgeting being on autopilot. So, right, we take last year's, we change a couple of percentage points, and we literally are working around the edges of what we used to do. You mentioned Minnesota has a mandatory comp plan every 10 years. I have been one of those people that have also put that on autopilot. I essentially wanted to plug it into one of the AI bots and say, hey, modernize this for 2050. So you've given me sort of a new way to think about it, which is just a little bit more work. So I'll have to rethink my own philosophy on this. But there are a lot of governments that are in this boat that it's hard. It's kind of feels daunting to like kind of have to get off of autopilot.
Yeah.
How do you advise managers that you work with about some of the initial steps you can take to maybe try something different? What's been successful kind of from your perspective?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I think you should do is always try to think in terms of like co-benefits. So if you're going to, like, for example, if you're going to do a little bit more public engagement with your comp plan than maybe plugging it into an LLM, think about what other problem could
there
this
was
help
no
solve?
judgment in the tone of your voice. I just want to point that out.
I mean, who
Not
hasn't
an
done
ounce.
it?
Right.
Come on. Every listener of this podcast should be experimenting with that. So no shame in the game at all. But what I would say is think about if I'm going to do a little more community engagement around this process, what else can I benefit, or whom else could I benefit from this process? So maybe you have, I don't know, maybe you're losing young people, or you're like, we really want to do more talent retention with our next generation. Get them directly involved. Give them the task, and not in a drive-by, you guys are in charge of this way, but this is going to be professional development for you guys. This is going to be, a part of your briefing moving forward. And this is the timeline of stuff that I want, so that you end up getting like an internal benefit on the workforce side, and you get this external benefit of them getting out in the community and interfacing with people and people having a say. So, I mean, 2 benefits are great. Getting 3 is like the trifecta. But I think we need that helps break down silos too, our siloed thinking about this group does this thing at this time with these people. So that would be one way to think about it. And then I am a huge fan of just like, a quick hackathon and a couple of pilots that you evaluate lightly, but evaluate effectively. I think pilots can, everybody, except maybe the most hardened among us, wants to be a part of a
That's Mike.
community. The old guy.
Sorry, you're not talking. You're just talking. I got it. Never mind. Sorry. Yeah.
Authenticity. Everybody wants to be a part of something that's becoming. And that, I think, is like the kind of the secret dose of running like a fun pilot, like something that's really off the wall to just see what can be done. So and okay, and then I want to actually take the other side of that argument immediately afterwards. When we were at ICMA in July, we hosted dinners a couple of nights, and one night we had a bunch of younger people, like people who would be great city managers someday, but they're in their 20s, or early 30s, are not quite ready. But we went around the table and said, how are you doing and what are you wondering about right now with respect to local government? And the gal who was sitting to my right, she said, when is government going to get boring again? Because it's been such a whack-a-mole, right? And so I think sometimes people think that the next generation is just full of people who have ADHD and it's all about them, but not the young people who come into local government. Like, I mean, I'm not saying they have long attention spans or they don't want immediate, feedback, or they don't feel like they should win a trophy. But the reason they get into local government is the same reason you guys did. We all did, which is a heart for service. And some of that should be good and boring.
I think as we talk about the struggle with the budget, to circle a little bit back to that, when I think about my own, and my community is relatively small, which probably represents 80% of the communities in the country, that are less than 10,000 people. And I think about, our two big things that we spend money on are capital investments and people. So 80% of my general fund is people, right? It's salaries, it's benefits. And when I think about that aspect of my budget, it feels very static, right? Because of what it pays for. But what we've started asking questions around, and I think this is where the scariness comes in, and we've talked a lot about scariness in the last several episodes, but the scariness comes in when we talk about people, is that you're saying that I should not be doing the work that I'm doing, that my job somehow is wrong, that I'm not I'm not a good investment. And I've had a couple of those kinds of conversations with folks when we talk about program evaluation, when we talk about the work and why. What is the why behind the task? Why are you spending so much time doing that? Is it because you have to? Because we have a system problem? Or is it because you have to because we have a tradition problem? Or is it because you have to because if you don't do it, this thing doesn't happen over here, and that thing is so critical? And when you start to break it down like that, it becomes a little bit less scary, but it's still a frightening aspect to the conversation. And I see supervisors veer away from those kinds of difficult discussions because they want, and we talked about this, the power of like protecting. They want to protect this aspect that they perhaps have cultivated for a really long time for good and ill purposes. And at the same time, on the other side of the spectrum, when you talk about change in a place like my community where change is a 4-letter word and tradition is king, we joke that progress without change is our unofficial motto. You start talking about, maybe we could do this thing a little bit differently, and then everyone jumps up and down. Even people who are young, thoughtful, articulate outside of tradition are like, well, you can't do that, because if you do that, then it won't feel the same, and I like how it feels. And so we sometimes find ourselves in the middle of these two competing games of tug of war of tradition, of whose tradition and who's going to be in the middle where that tradition maybe gets a little bit broken. And so I think the struggle overall to give everybody a little bit of perhaps a pat on the back that it isn't all bad, is that we have to work to make that tradition evolve, if nothing else.
Mhm.
I like to say it's not progress without change, it's progress with thoughtful change. And I think that's where the boring nature of government can actually help us get there. Because if you strip it down, the boring stuff is the most important. That's the stuff that goes back in the closet when you're cleaning it
Mhm.
out. Um, but it's not easy. It's not easy to even get to that place because you just have so much protectionism going on. And this isn't so much a question as it is more of a statement about where I think people really struggle in this profession to be both very forward thinking, thoughtful, process oriented. Let's throw that AI into the system. Let's get better data. And everybody who's like, that's going to break it so much that we're afraid of what we don't know. It kind of goes back to that risk aversion that I was talking about before. So, unlike Mike, who is a very comfortable in disruption person, I have often found myself in that place of wanting to be more comfortable in disruption and then finding that I get pulled back toward the safe zone.
Mhm.
um and it's a real struggle. It's an anxious struggle that I think a lot of managers find themselves in the middle of, and it's why a lot of managers sometimes find themselves out of a job, because they see the need to change and other people don't, perhaps along with them. So again, I think it's a unique challenge of our time to be both honest with what your organization needs to do, and honest with how much you can actually move that dial.
Yeah, it strikes me that the what gets back in the closet maybe doesn't change very much, but how we do it might change. And maybe that can help bring comfort for people. But I would also say that, like, we know from employee engagement studies that the manager is the most important person in the employee's life. They really set the weather for the department. And so if I was a city manager, I would be spending my time thinking about how to incent and get my managers turned on about change. And that is a hard job, a darn hard job.
So I get to spend my days differently than Phil and Mike right now. So I'm going to dive right into the deep water because I feel like that's the only appropriate thing to do with the Futurist on the podcast. So we've talked a little bit. Mike and I are big fans of Howe and Strauss generations. You talked about patterns. But when Mike named this episode, it was about signals. And so we've talked about driverless cars. Phil's version of us and the Jetsons are called pods. We're seeing drone delivery. And as I look forward into the future, I don't see a generation growing up that is emotionally attached to lines on a map the way we or local governments are. And when we think about drone delivery, when it's crossing multiple jurisdictions, who oversees it? Who manages it? And the longer we hold on as we're slipping on the black ice right now, and while it feels like we're living in disruption, if you follow house cycles or even some of the other work that's been done, we're actually on the other side. It's just very unsettling at the moment. And so when you're looking out at the future world of local government, what do you see that you can talk to us and our audience about and kind of introduce? These are the things that are going to make you uncomfortable, but this is where the future's headed.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is something that I'm very personally noticing within myself, which is the speed of large language models, the speed of the adaptive learning of, networked systems. I mean, like, when you think about, like, Waymo, y- when one car doesn't hit a dog running across the street, every car in the entire network learns that. Not one car, Every car in the entire network learns that. So as we continue to use agents and AI and robotics, because again, AI does not mean large language models. Large language models, you guys talked about this previously. Large language models are one kind of AI, but the layering of AI, the ability for it to learn and adapt is so much greater than what we do in our two hands and feet. And that's one of the reasons we're going to be rejecting it or afraid of it, because we can't imagine how quickly this thing is learning. And so, to the black ice analogy, again, I'm seeing this within myself. Like things are, the feedback can come so fast, and I'm like, boom, it's like my hair gets blown back, and I'm like, I'm gonna need a second to think this through. I'm gonna close that tab. I'll come back to you in a minute. But what do we do with black ice? The correct way to navigate through black ice, with all four of the screens on this, stream have, is we know that we've got to steer into it. Don't pump the brakes. You actually have to steer into it, not away from it. So to the extent that you can, as a city leader, steer into the ethical use of these tools, the way that these tools can make you more effective. And so that's the first thing. It's going to feel so fast that it is going to be unmooring. Lean into it. The second thing I would say is one of the things I'm very concerned about in our communities is our need to rebuild social capital. So, this is the old Putnam work about bowling alone and that we don't join things anymore. And although I'm not a super religious person, this is where I wish more people did go to church, because it was one of the last, third places. It wasn't work, it wasn't home, but you saw the same people every week. And it was hard for you to talk about those people because those people were in the pew across from you, and one of the reasons that I'm so concerned about social capital is because the leadership churn that we are experiencing in our communities right now. I mean, we are in our third year of the highest record ever. So in 2024, we had the highest record ever of CEOs retiring or resigning. And then 2025 beat that record. 2023, then 2024, now 2025. And some of that is baby boomers, that is just demographics. But it also represented a lot of stability within our communities. So, for example, here's a signal, right? At the summer meeting of the the American Society of Association Executives, ASAE. The number one thing that every association executive was talking about, they were like, my board is driving me crazy, because boards don't know what their jobs actually are. And so they default to doing staff's job. The same thing is happening in local government, right? I mean, I don't think this is, unique necessarily to you or to associations, but the lack of civics and really understanding what local government does. I have talked to countless city managers who say, my local government my electeds actually don't know what happens inside of local government. And so I was just talking to somebody in Fargo today, and they've started this Center for Civic Engagement, and they're looking at the entire middle school through, CEO level continuum of how to teach what it is to participate in civic life and to lead in civic life. Because the sort of the same center within our communities is very concerned about who's running for office and who's getting elected for office. So I'll stop there. I think somebody wanted to jump in.
Your origin story of your parent or your mom wanting to participate. And I think what we've all experienced is that we're seeing fewer and fewer people who are willing to raise their hand, and more people who are doing this. They're just pulling their hands down. They're saying it's not worth it. We have, my community is unique in that it's quite affluent, but we have a career day at the junior high. And my public works department went, my public safety department went. They were both there, and they both came back, and we were talking, and they said, I'm not sure that anybody wants to be us when they grow up. And I said, I will tell you, I don't know that I care that they want to be you or not. I care that they understand who you are and why you do the work you do, because that is how you build civic awareness. That it isn't just, I want to become a cop when I grow up, or I want to become an engineer when I grow up. It's, oh, I understand why we have cops and why we have engineers, and I'm willing to pay my property taxes or my sales tax or whatever that funding mechanism is to support that because it's meaningful. Because now I know that you care about the pipes that are under the street that I really don't care about, but I'm glad you do, because all I care about is that when I turn the faucet on, the water comes out. When I flush the toilet, the water goes away. So I think that's the piece of it. Your point in Fargo about like starting at that middle school level and continuing to help people through the next stages of their life understand that civic engagement isn't about necessarily working in that civic environment, but it being aware of and appreciating that it exists to support their lives and make their lives better. And that's the piece of it that I feel like, as civics has kind of erased from the general educational models around us, that's the part that's been lost, is this appreciation for the fact that this is important. And so it's, I totally love that structure that you're talking about. And that's, how I feel like we have to try to prop it up.
All right, so I'm going to transition to a couple of things because we've had a lot of references to black ice. We've had a lot of references to the upper Midwest. And we've had an interesting reference to Neil Strauss and their book. And Rebecca Ryan, you introduced this concept in this book to me, and I will say maybe a dozen years ago. I think you were one of the first ones who kind of captured this. And one of your slides that you had on a presentation that you gave was "Winter is coming." And so I'm gonna pause very quickly because it is a feels like temperature right now in Minnesota on this lovely day of about 29 below. I'm just curious, as a fellow upper Midwesterners, kind of how awful is it where you are presently? Corey?
Balmy 0 at the moment,
Oh, it's beautiful.
with a real temp overnight of -13. So that will put us in the -30s for sure.
Perfect. Phil? Rebecca?
So right now I am at an air temperature of 15, which is, it feels apparently very balmy, with a real feel of -3. I don't get into the deep negatives until after sunrise tomorrow, where it's still predicting -11 air temperature, but a real feel of -42.
Woo!
Yikes. Woof. Gross.
I feel like everybody is sharing their tomorrow forecast to just one up their current forecast. I feel like you guys are a little competitive amongst each other. I'm not going to pull up my tomorrow because I can't chew gum and read it. Yeah, I can chew gum and
Yeah.
read at the same time. I can't do whatever this is. So my actual temperature is 3, and it feels like -16 on the shores of Lake Monona in Madison, Wisconsin.
I love it. So I appreciate that because for everybody in warmer climates, like, yes, it does get terribly cold. But I want to go back to, so Rebecca, you introduced this concept of winter is coming. It was probably a TLG conference, I'm guessing. You have gotten a lot of things right. Is there anything in your career that you maybe thought was going to be a big deal that didn't turn out the same way you thought? And maybe this is an unfair question. So is there anything that you thought was going to be bigger that wasn't? And then the next question of this, that kind of a two-part question, is what is the one thing you're excited to watch more of?
Well, I feel like I got social networking wrong. Um, because I thought social networking was just going to be tremendous to help connect people across generations, etc. I did not anticipate that the algorithms would be fine-tuned for engagement, and I did not know that the things that are most engaging are the things that are most enraging. And so, I don't know that I would want to take social media away, but I would definitely want to mm, castrate the algorithm, if I could just be so bold, because it is not helping us with our mental health. It's certainly not helping with levels of violence. It's not helping with our political health. So that's something that I really got wrong. Um, and then what was your one thing that I'm hopeful about? Is
Yeah,
what
or
was
you're
your
watching more carefully maybe as the next thing.
Yeah. Well, so my brain is being split in two directions. One is more of the hardware direction, and the other is more of the software direction. But I will say, and you guys have talked about this a little bit on previous episodes. If you haven't, please go back and listen to every one of the episodes in this series about disruption. I think they've just been terrific. But you guys have been talking about uh, granny habits. And I've had this same experience. So real quickly, next to my house, I walk my dog every afternoon, and next to my house is this little park that we always walk through. And in the summer, there's this tiny, tiny little beach, tiny, like maybe 20 feet long. It's called BB Clark Beach, for those of you who know Madison. And young people this summer at the beach, and I know they were younger than me because they were willing to take off their clothes. Young people at the beach were wearing their swim costumes, and they were reading hardcover books. The first day I saw this happen, I was like, weird. The second day I was like, is this week like reading week? Like, is this like a challenge that all the cool, Gen Alphas are like into? And it just continued to happen. And so I checked it out, and the American Library Association tracks book sales, and the fastest growing buyers of hardcover books are millennials. And so, on the one hand, I think in the same way that you guys are experiencing, like, wow, getting out of the information stream isn't just doom scrolling. It's also like you lose all sense of time and your place in space. It really takes you out of yourself. It's very disorienting. Like, how is it that you started watching those dog videos at 8:30 and all of a sudden it's 11:30? Like, it's very odd, right? And these very physical things like yoga, like knitting, like reading a book, like loading your dishwasher, right? These things put you in the moment. They put you in your hands and feet, and where you can be a true human being, And so the pendulum does always swing back. And I think that that's one of the things I feel most optimistic about is, our return to doing the things that make us true human beings. Now, a little tiny side signal on this is, my friend DT, who's my graphic designer, he lives out in Seattle, and he was in a knitting store the other day because he's cool like that. He's a hipster. And he was loading up on his knitting gear, and he said, how's business? And the lady goes, business is off the chain. It's so good. And he's like, wow, that's great. He's like, she goes, not really. My business always goes up during a recession. And so I was like, that's the last thing we need in local government. I thought I had never heard that before. I thought that was an interesting signal of the future. But just to zoom back out, I'm really excited about Granny.
So, kind of along that, and I think in the generational work, art, and I think we talked about this when we talked about generations in one of the early episodes, is that there's always an artistic renaissance that happens during the rebuild. And it's happened through every cycle in American history. And so maybe just maybe, that knitting and crocheting and canning and yoga are going to give way to a generation that's going to create our next great artistic wave.
I certainly hope so. And like, right. And so I had the opportunity to jog my 14, soon to be 15-year-old daughter and her friends. And if you have an opportunity to drive a bunch of pre-teens or early teens to hear the things that they go through their lives, and they had the most, what I would say, like profound adult conversations using language that I didn't know existed. But as I'm listening, I was like, okay, I am absolutely confident that these kids have got it figured out. And so I am super confident about kind of the direction of the world and where we're headed. Yeah, the quirky little grandma habits. I know, Rebecca, you have a sourdough starter or two, I would imagine somewhere. Again, I don't know if you keep it in the fridge or the counter or where these things actually live. Yeah, we're on to something kind of special. I don't like the signal of maybe a recession on the future or on the horizon. It's also probably time, right? Is our patterns tend to repeat themselves, at least economically. It's entirely plausible that that's coming. So, um, I say all of that to say this is a transition. But Phil jumped in because I could see the look in his eye. He has a question for you. So, but before we jump, I'm going to go to Phil.
Well, I think the question I had for you, Rebecca, is so as we're talking about the the things that we're excited about or seeing or perhaps perceiving, what is something that you would suggest that we start paying better attention to than perhaps we have, to help, what are those signals that are out there that may help us start to prepare, whether it's a recession or whether it's anything else, that maybe we're not paying attention to today?
Yeah. I'm not going to tell you what to look for. I'm going to tell you how to look for it because it's gonna serve you better and it'll be more evergreen. Um, and I do this all the time, and then I felt so like a warm sisterly arm around my shoulder because I had an opportunity to be at what I have bound with my signature to be an undisclosed location a couple of weeks ago. And the CEO of said undisclosed location admitted that she hates going to cocktail parties. So the opening session was like her in a one-on-one conversation, like her thoughts. And somebody asked her, "So what are you seeing?" And she said, "Well, I hate going to cocktail parties." She's a nerd. She's like an introvert. "I hate going to cocktail parties, but I have to go to a certain number of these things." And she's like, "I hate talking to people. So what do you do? Blah, blah, blah." She's like, "But after I do that, I say, what's one thing that you're just starting to begin hearing about that you think is going to be big in 2 years' time?" And that, I'll tell you what, you guys, that is a question that I'm going to ask each of you, but it will crack open your heads around things that other people are thinking about. Another great question that I have used after fumbling through an alley of darkness with a group once was, rather than asking them about headwinds and tailwinds, I asked, what is in your next strategic plan that might surprise people? And boo, that has been an eye-opener as well. It's how I found out, well before it was in the news, that a major mortgage underwriter was going to stop doing 30-year mortgages. So, just asking other people what they're paying attention to and what is surprising in their strategic plan, it really opens you. It like helps you do the reps of listening for signals.
Well, that was a perfect transition into what I was going to ask. As you right, you are obviously a listener of the podcast, and we are grateful that you do that. And I appreciate that you were able to catch some of the jokes that we've had internally and some of the long running references. So to all of the viewers at home and listeners, please do all the things, right? Give us some feedback and tell us that you're liking the show. If you want to give us a like or a share, we would certainly appreciate it. So one of the bits that we do is questions for us. You maybe previewed a couple of them, so we have to answer. What do you got for us?
The question I want to know, you can take your choice. Either one thing that you're starting to hear about that you think this could be big in a couple years' time. It's not big now, but it could be big. Or if there's something in your strategic plan that you think people would be surprised about.
This is also the point of the show where I always go, Phil?
That's just because I was fumbling to find my stupid unmute button so I could say Mike.
No,
So he
I
could
will
start.
I will take this one. And again, I actually don't know how to answer the question, but I'll start answering it and I will finally maybe arrive at something. But I have been struck by this this consolidation of technology software firms and everything, right? The model is that the big giants eat these little fish and they keep getting bigger. And it was actually something that my friend Jerry talked about the other night, which was like these large enterprise-wide software systems that take 18 months to scope out and then implement and then irritate everybody in the organization. Uh, those days, I think, are gone. And so as we are building out our 5-year technology sort of portfolio and plan, we are planning on not having enterprise-wide systems, but instead focusing on, right, data points and outcomes and letting a little bit of the machine do some of that work.
The thing that I was going to say is actually somewhat similar, but along perhaps the lines, Rebecca, that you were talking about a moment ago. I've had a number of conversations with people, not just with Corey and Mike, about how they are severing themselves from social media as a means of mental health. Like being very specific in their purpose and reasoning behind it, that they want to feel better and that they have discerned that these things are making them less well. And I will say it has spanned a spectrum of age of people. Not a whole lot of people in the boomer generation. They seem to love their Facebook, but the number of folks in my orbit from all aspects of my life who have posted in the last probably 6 weeks that thank you everybody. It's been fun. This ride for the last 18 years on Facebook has given me a lot, but it is no longer good for me. And so I'm going to step away from it. Here's my cell phone number, or message me for my cell phone number. I'd love to hear from you anytime, but I'm not going to be here anymore. And I have really grappled with that myself because social media has become a big part of my life in a positive and less positive way. And it's been an interesting thing as I see memories come back on Facebook. I've been on the platform for 18 years. 18 years is a staggering number. And I think about who I was when I first started versus who I am today. And I don't know that the platform has made me any better. It's certainly, I've changed a lot, but is it something that serves me anymore? And I think that's the question that I'm just seeing so many people ask. And it isn't specific to, one particular platform. It's kind of, is this the thing that really binds us together in a way that we had hoped? Like you said before, like this thing could be so amazing if we didn't bastardize it into being just a money-making and I think that's the struggle. And I personally have struggled with it because I have some really great connections through social media. Elementary school teachers.
Wow.
I'm gonna go on vacation this summer, and I reached out to my 8th grade teacher who lives where we're gonna go, and I said, "Look, I'd love to see you." When we get there, these are the dates we're going to be there. I don't have his contact information anywhere else. And I'm like, I should, but I know I'll lose it. And so this is a very convenient way for me to stay in touch. But is it enough? Is that the reason to stay on those platforms? So I think there's such a real reckoning that people are making right now. And it's, the last 6 weeks, there's probably been 20 people in my orbit who
Wow.
have said, "See ya, I'm done."
So that makes me think of, we've talked about switching costs in the past, right? So the idea that you have 18 years invested, all those memories, it's the nostalgia. And over the past 2 weeks, so I have a class reunion coming up this summer in north central Wisconsin. And it's one of those that ends with a 0. And so our class president started a Facebook group chat. Well, tiny town, my class was 36 kids. 30 of us are in the group chat, which is incredibly
Wow.
efficient when you're trying to do logistics for that. And so that made me think about I deleted the app before ICMA, both Meta apps last year. I didn't delete my accounts, but I don't engage with them on a daily basis, except for now I have this insane group chat going on because we're trying to plan a reunion with 30 people's opinions, which is just bad logistics. So, but I'm going to deviate a little bit from your question because that's what I do. And my notes, and it ties a little bit to Phil, what you said, but for me, influencer culture is what turned me off of social media. And with AI, it's really hard to know what's authentic, what's real, and what's curated. And so I just don't want to know. But the people I do follow, mainly on YouTube, I know they're real people. I know they're subject matter experts or at least students of whatever they're talking about. And they suck me in. And I spent 2 days studying all sorts of fun, fascinating things on YouTube the past 2 days. And so for my micro level, what I'm doing with my life going forward, so I'll put it in the context of my personal strategic plan, is I'm going wide instead of deep. Like, as I transitioned out of my last career, I learned that I no longer wanted to be only known as my job description. Like, my job title was who I was to so many people. And that had some real consequences in my life when my job title went away. And so over the past 2 years, I'm like, okay, well, I get a second chance at life. What does that mean? Well, now I get to share in podcast co-hosting with 2 people who I respect and adore. And I get to play pretend and be a podcast production intern because that's what I am. And that's the level of expertise I have. And I just wrote a book. And I have all of these other things I am doing, but my future is more about going wide than it is about going deep. When I zoom up to macro level, and something I think people should be watching, I think of housing, and not just the narrative we hear about housing shortages. But when you think about housing, how many boomers do we all know in our orbits that live in one, own a second one? Or how many people do you know that have Airbnbs or VRBOs? And so when we think about the housing stock, specifically here in the US, there is so much of it that's underutilized for people to actually live in. And then you add in the complete evolution of employment. And so how many downtown urban centers and even suburban pockets are dealing with high vacancy rates? And so how do you repurpose what can be repurposed? Some of it's going to be torn down. But how do you repurpose that into the next evolution of what live, work, and play means in our country? Because I don't think it's going to look like acre suburban lots with 4,000 square foot houses going forward. I just don't see that being the future.
What a bunch of smarties you guys are. And now we're 5 with
Especially-
this gorgeous
especially-
black lab.
Yeah, this is Rosie. She seems like she's cold because she was
Rosie.
like she was laying on my feet. So I said, all right, that's fine.
She
she's
heard
a
us
good girl.
report our temperatures, and she's like, "Ooh, I'm getting cold just thinking about it."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Rebecca, I mean, I really appreciate the question. It was harder for me to figure out what's in our strategic plan that is not, that's not like sort of the usual things. Cause right. We talk about, right. We drink and drive and flush and we do kind of the basics things. And like, there's, in a lot of communities, getting a strategic plan is a Herculean effort. And then getting one that really tries to capture a 10-year horizon, or you describing even longer, that's a real challenge. But I appreciate that was probably the hardest question I've had from a guest. And I appreciate the comment that we're, what you call it, smarties. But, when we started this podcast, it was like we're moderately interesting. Like we should just see if this is a go. And so we pledged to do 10 episodes. Here we are, into the 20 somethings already, and we're having a blast. So we're just going to keep doing it. So, and as long as we get brilliant guests like you who can say things like irony is just, pragmatism and drag, like that was like a comedy gold and such a great line that ought to be a coffee mug.
Well, you know what? So speaking of like the comedy thing, I was just thinking about like how on time you guys are with this podcast, because there is an opening in this, local government nerds who are also like positive people, like, so I think like the fact that you're bringing this, real conversations, but in a way that like we can be the change we want to see in the world. I hear that from you guys all the time on the show. And then I think about how, my hero, Amy Poehler, won Podcast of the Year, and her podcast is called Good Hang, and they just crack up. And, her last question is always like, what's making you laugh these days? And I just think, the fact that you guys are positive and you're focused on what does work and what good government can be, it's a joy to be with you guys. And I thank you for putting the time in, because you all have very busy lives.
So one of the things in our pre-show prep, when we were exchanging emails, you said, well, I can answer the questions. Here are the questions people most ask. And I said, that's swell. But I'm more interested in what the question people should be asking you right now. So what should people, and it can be local government, it can be the bigger world around us. What are the signals telling you that people should be asking you about right now?
Okay, I'm gonna take my futurist cap off, and I'm just gonna put on my human cap. I wish I was asked on a podcast once, like, if you could create one billboard that everybody in the world would see, like on the same day, what would you put on the billboard? And this is what I think we should all be thinking about. And apologies for anybody who thinks I'm being Debbie Downer. I actually think this is one of the most life-giving questions you can possibly ask yourself. But if everybody could see this message, you will die. You will die. And what do you want your legacy to be for the teenager today who's, riding with all of her, squad to whatever she's going to next? For, I mentioned the Next Gen commissioner in Wales, the idea of having somebody waking up thinking about, are we doing right by our kids? Are the choices I'm making today going to have a positive impact for them? If we could all ask ourselves, are my choices impacting, the next generation positively? Are they adding up to a legacy I can be really proud to leave? That's the one thing I wish people would spend a little bit of time reflecting on.
I got a little bit of a dose of that today. I met with a recently graduated college student who's thinking about maybe discerning a career in public service. And he's a friend of a friend, and we met for coffee, and it was a little awkward at first. He didn't know me, I didn't know him, so we're trying to understand what we each do. And so I asked him, I said, why are you even interested in having this conversation? And he told this story, and I shared this with Corey. He told this story about how he was working with a special needs individual who was about the same age as him, who couldn't drive and had to be driven somewhere, or would have to walk if it was close enough. And they would meet, and they'd have regular, weekly meetings. And the city that they were in California, built a bike path that connected this young man's neighborhood to where he would meet with the guy that I met with today. And it gave them the opportunity, and particularly this special needs individual, the opportunity to ride his scooter from his house to where he had to go, and gave him this immense sense of independence. And this kid is like, that's what I realized, like, that was the light bulb over my head, that there's people that actually did that created that bike path that changed his life. And I want to be one of those people. And I was like, oh, well, that's the best story I think I've ever heard for why somebody wants to do this work. And man, I tell you, when we talk about this work, it sucks a lot. It's really hard. It takes the life out of you. It can be draining and horrendous, and people are mean and they don't care and they're not civically minded and all of that. And it all gets washed away when you put that bike path in and that kid can get from point A to point B safely and with a sense that they did it. And that's what it's all about when we talk about this work. That right there is what it's all about. And so it was such a joy to get that shot of optimism that the future is way better than we're giving it credit for right now. It is in the hands of somebody like that who says, I'm gonna be the one who builds that next path. It's work worth doing.
Corey, I know, right? We talk about this all the time. Like I've had goosebumps 3 different times in this podcast today because it has just been so richly rewarding. I'm going to turn it over to my friend Corey to wrap us in and close, and then Rebecca, we will save the final word for you. But I can see Corey's got a little question or a little kind of closing comment. I can see it on the screen. That's why you should watch this on YouTube because it's hilarious. So Corey, I hand it over to you.
We've talked about this a lot. And when Phil had told me this story before we started recording, like, it's so sweet and so endearing. And, my day was a little different. I had to go meet with the school. Bullying's real. But at the same point, when we got home, we talked about how we learn to deal with difficult people. And so I think this generation growing up with technology everywhere, I think they're going to see the world differently. And whether you look at how cycles of generations or, whatever you subscribe to and how you look at patterns, the kids right now really are the magic key. And whatever we can do, and we've talked about this, my dissertation, the 2 magic ingredients are hope and optimism, like more important than almost everything else. The more we can do as a society, as parents, as mentors, whatever that looks like, to give them those moments of hope and optimism. Because Phil, when we were talking before, I'm like, I feel like we're in this slingshot phase. We're in that transition. We're coming out of winter. We have one more good deep freeze, and then we're going to catapult forward, and it's going to go fast, but it's going to be magical. And if we can just remember that part, it's going to be magical. We get to build a better tomorrow. And that is incredibly important and terrifying, and being the parents that get to empower the kids to do that is also like the greatest gift our Generation X could probably ever have. And so I offer that, Rebecca, you're a renowned economist and futurist, and you love our profession the same way we do. And so we will let you have the final thoughts.
There's this, it's written to the Constitution in Norway, but it's this principle of intergenerational equity that every living generation must act not only in their own interests, but in a way that doesn't harm the potential of future generations. And, I think we just get in our own way. It's actually pretty easy to do this better. And it is to just decenter yourself and center someone else, center someone with less privilege than you have. And a lot of times that's people who are younger than us and people who are much older than us and people who are differently abled. But if we just take a little bit of the focus off of the me parade and, center the next generation, to your point, it's some of the best work we get to do, and we can do it. And I'm sure glad you 3 are like, you're like the Vegas showgirls just leading the way.
No one wants to see that.
Well,
I can do a pretty good high kick. I just want to point that out.
No,
and you can sing. We know this.
Yeah, so he can sing. I'm sure he can dance. I would actually say we should probably get our AI overlords to maybe make us a little dance routine. Totally, we could do that.
Not it.
I'll give it a shot. Rebecca, thank you so much. You are a friend and a colleague and a mentor to so many of us in this profession. You have incredible stories. For our listeners who want to, you have done some cool things in Minnesota. You have done cool things around the country. If someone wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way how do they get in touch with you? How do they gain a deeper insight into you and the work you do? And how can you potentially help us?
Just Google like Rebecca Ryan Futurist. The best way, so every Monday or sometimes Tuesday, if Monday is a holiday like MLK Day, I send out a signal of the week, and it's very short, very small, but it's some signal that could become a trend in the future. Not all these signals do, but it's just a little something to give your beak a little bit something to kind of crack a nut on, like just a little something. Signal of the week, and then I usually do a deeper dive on a topic of interest to build better communities. So my Substack is the best place to look for me, Rebecca Ryan Futurist, but my website's got a good blog, and I'm on Instagram-ish. I mean, I'm on-ish. I don't really participate. I just post like what I'm seeing and happening. So those are probably the best ways. Thanks, Mike.
Well, no, it is. You are deeply insightful, and we are grateful for the time that you gave us. It has made this program better that you have been on it, and so for that, thank you. For our guests, we are going to close out January with our next episode, talking about the stewards of what's next, and so we'll be talking to some ICMA fellows and getting some deep insight into what's coming behind us. So that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Authenticity FM. We'll see you again.